디지털 익스체인지에 이제 CC5도 역임하셨고요. 그래서 스위스 금융권에서 이제 가상자산과 관련된 다양한 동향이나 제도들 잘 알고 있어서 저희한테 그런 내용을 잘 소개해 주실 것 같습니다. 자, Mr. Sauter, yeah, it's your turn.
Ik hoor het nu, Ivo.
Mr. Sauter, yeah, could you start?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Sorry, I had some technical issues. Sorry for that. So happy to start. Thanks a lot to the organizer. Feel honored to be here. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like to give a quick overview on digital assets for financial institutions. What we are doing here in Switzerland as financial institutions. My role at Gazprom Bank in Switzerland is Chief Digital Transformation and Strategy Officer. So I have our digital team as well as our IT and as our project team. And obviously we are quite active in looking at the digital asset, how this would change the financial infrastructure in Switzerland and what would it mean for banks here in Switzerland. So now, looking at it, still suffering from some technical issues. Sorry for that. So, can you see my screen with the?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So if I look at the digital assets, I think the very new thing about it is that all the asset informations are included in the asset itself. So the full beneficial ownership information, which is included in the asset but not necessarily shared. In ERC20 token, that's obviously a wallet address if you do it the right way. Other bank-specific data which you could add on a sidechain if you need. Then obviously you need to include an asset identifier, an asset class, the asset class property, the asset servicing logic, and if needed, a member ID. So unlike where an asset is kind of stupid in the current situation and it's just an ISIN or another identifier number, we would add logic into the asset itself. This then allows us to communicate directly over DLT. In this case, this is sample around quarter hour 3, where we would share the asset details with 2 involved banks in a transactions, fully encrypted. It will pass through non-involved banks for privacy reasons, and it will go into markets and settlement surveillance, and if needed, to the regulator. So to show a bit what that would exactly mean and what the big change to today's world, I have tried to draw on today's world in terms of asset services. It's a very simple a very simple example. It's a dividend payment from the CSD. I took the Swiss CSD, which is SAS from 6, where a company would want to issue a dividend, and you see all the steps which are needed. Basically, the dividend needs to be notified to the payment agent. It needs to be notified to the CSD involved. Then it will be a notification to the bank where the client holds the asset, and ultimately gets booked to the beneficial owner. And this involves all these steps for a very, very simple a dividend transaction. It's mainly based on Swift. It's based on sending Swift notification and receiving Swift notification back until it's received and booked. If we look about how this would look like in the new world, and I think that's the very big changing part is you can do everything between the buyer and the seller. So it means between the beneficial owners, getting them to the exchange and doing all the asset transactions or the asset servicing in an automated way as well. So this is the example of the change of ownership, and given both of them are stored, all the information is stored in the asset itself. The asset servicing will look exactly the same, and I think that's the very interesting part. So instead of that, every house, and we know that in the traditional world very well, has to build their own automation. And for standard asset servicing, every bank has their automation in the old world. But as I also stated before, the old world looks like this. So you have automation around the payment banks. You have an automation within the CSD. You have an automation with the receiving bank. In the new world, the automation can be end-to-end on both sides, and I think that's the very, very, very big advantage. So it's a big reduction of how assets can be traded. It's in terms of cost, in terms of risk, and it's a big reduction in terms of how an asset can be serviced afterwards, end to end. If we look what this new services bring for what kind of efficiencies they bring. They bring much easier access for the sell side to the buy side. So banks or companies which have balance sheet needs can transfer it in a much faster, in a much quicker way to institutions, to high net individuals, and at the end of the day as well to retail clients. Same thing happens for a broader client base, so beyond a bank. So there can be a company, a treasury in a company. They wouldn't necessarily need a bank for it anymore, or a bank would change their services much more to advise them and provide them technical infrastructure or support, and they can bring their assets in a much quicker, in a much smoother way to institutional clients. And last but not least, I mean, we still have roughly 70% of our assets are non-bankable assets, which so far are not handled by banks, and I would say institutional investors can access them. Ultra high net worth individuals can access them somehow, but for everybody else, they can't access them. And here with tokens, we come along with much smaller segregations. We can multiply tokens in a much smaller way. The reason for is all the cost efficiency we have, and that gives, I would say, the mid-tier private banking, high net worth individuals, and obviously, especially as well, retail clients, a much better access to a totally new asset class. Here, what we look at is efficiency gains, very much around efficiency gains. So cost will go down tremendously. Financial cost, operational cost, but as well data cost, because everything on the blockchain is going to be can be accessed as well. Transactions costs are going down as well. And on the other hand, the business opportunities out of that is obviously a very much broadened asset universe. This specifically due to non-banking assets which be added to that. Primary and secondary markets will be established. So far, assets which cannot be transacted or transacted only at a very high cost will be able to be transacting much easier. Not saying that the volume will always be much higher. That's obviously a goal, but it's a question of how many buyers and sellers you find. But at least the price for such markets will come down. This allows us to drive private markets in which all of the buy side participant can participate. And last but not least, it gives you an asset. It gives you access to global client access. So while today club-deals are typically relatively regional, so you only have usually one set of clients. They're usually a small number of clients, and they're usually ultra high net worth individuals. This kind of investments can be opened down to retail investors if retail investors will be interested into it. Now, if I look a bit of what is happening in the market and what is needed for such a change, I would very much believe that at least 3-4 steps are needed in terms of adoption. So while we in Switzerland starting with that and have a very good legal framework, I would say internationally the legal framework still needs to improve. So in Switzerland we have the DLT law, and I think my colleague afterwards we'll talk a bit more about it, which the first part was implemented already beginning of this year, and the second part, especially around the marketplaces, will be implemented in August. So we have clarity how to operate with this kind of new assets. However, the Swiss market is a small market, and it's probably not sufficient just having the Swiss market. So on the midterm, we will need a broader understanding of legal frameworks internationally. So I think that's for me a very important point before we see much wider and increased adoption beyond Switzerland. The second important part, besides the legal framework, is that we have a stable coin. And here, if we look at the current stable coins, and if we talk about stable coins, I think most people think about Tether. If we look at the current setup of stable coins, there you treat volatility risk pretty much against credit risk. What is needed is a central bank stable coin, or at least a stable coin out of consortium of institutions which link it to some underlinings, which generates very much the reduced volatility. I mean, I'm thinking here of banking consortiums, but obviously the project which Facebook initially initiated could be a direction as well. But ultimately to have banks and bigger companies operate in the DLT space, you will need to have a settlement coin which you can handle with low or non-credit risk, and which has a very low or no volatility. And the last setup is integration into the core banking system. So all the banks have already automation. All the banks have currently core banking systems. So what is needed are better APIs from this core banking system providers to connect to DLTs to make the entry hurdle for a bank to have automated asset servicing for digital asset much smoother, because short term it's an increase of work, it's an increase of cost, but it's an investment for the future where I believe cost will come down, and this new cost coming down will drive a lot of new ideas to what extent digital assets can be used. So we see at the moment digital bonds in Switzerland, couple of digital bonds projects where discussions are between do coupons get streamed instead of paid annually or twice a year, and we see a lot of combinations between traditional assets. So I give an example. We see a combination between a loyalty coin and an equity as an example. So one of the skiing areas in Switzerland has such a coin where everybody who buys a skiing ticket in their regards becomes a micro shareholder of that skiing region, and with that might get a discount for the next skiing ticket, or can in the future sell this micro holdings to somebody else who would like to collect maybe a bigger holding. So I think here a lot of projects are at the start. There's a lot of interest into it. The cheaper asset servicing allows the more optimized asset servicing allows new ways of handling securitization, new projects around that, which I believe it's a mega trend for the financial markets, and something every bank here in Switzerland is at least thinking about and try to get the way around. The more I would say fintech focused banks, they're trying to do prototypes already. With that, I would like to conclude the presentation and happy to answer questions. I can't hear you, Mr. Von.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question about the AML situation in Switzerland. In Korea, deadline for the filing of digital asset service provider is coming near. So a lot of the service provider is preparing filing for AML, but that is a very complicated process. So they have a very hard time now. How about in terms of AML regulation?
I mean, I think we have very fair AML regulation. Probably the speaker after me, who has a bit more of a legal background, is even better to answer that. But I mean, we have in Switzerland banks, including Gazprom banks, who operate as well in crypto. So here we have very clear guidance how to look at it. So you typically banks cooperate with companies specializing in chain analysis and then look what coins are tinted or not. So now for digital assets, it's probably two stories. The question is it a freely traded ERC20 token, which is allowed to be traded in a public blockchain as well? Then it will follow similar AML guidelines than we have on the crypto part. The second part, is it on a side chain of ERC20 or even on a private blockchain, which some banks and the SDX is looking at the moment. Obviously, there it becomes even simpler. So Obviously, everything in a private chain needs a bit of more understanding. You need to understand where those shares went through and come through. Typically, this can be solved that it needs some kind of register where you need to get an approval to be able to own the shares at the end of the day. So you need to go through mini AML or KYC in order to get a wallet in a way where then you can enable the shares or can hold the shares. I think that's probably the most common way at the moment. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, we have a few. Oh, yes.
Yes, maybe it's Matthias, and hello,
yeah,
everybody. Ivo already mentioned it. I'm covering crypto rather from the legal side, and I will also hold my presentation afterwards. But maybe just a few words on the AML applications in Switzerland. If, as let's say, crypto venture, for instance, a platform, which we often see, a tokenization platform, you would want to apply for an AML license, you can do so with a self-regulatory organization. And this is not the governmental regulator, the FINMA. And the process is not easy, of course, but it's still rather swift and not very costly. And once you have done that, you are as a rule compliant with the Swiss AML requirements, and then of course in the realm of the ongoing business, you have to do the necessary AML checks. But generally speaking, the process for so to speak being licensed as a service provider, let's say under the Swiss anti-money laundering laws, is not easy, but it's also not, an issue of several years and several 100,000 Swiss francs or so, but rather if you have a good project and all the necessary documents and internal regulations and people in place, such an application can be accomplished within, let's say, 3 to 6 months, and for 20,000 to 50,000 Swiss francs, and certainly not more. Just to give you a bit an overview of the processes.
Yeah, thank you for assuming the Korean company issue the utility token in Switzerland, is my understanding, and company doesn't need to have any the license from the Swiss government, but have to abide by AML regulation in Switzerland.
That's correct.
Yeah, is it right understanding?
I think, as you said, if it's a utility token, it's different than if it's a security token. So yeah, maybe first of all, Switzerland has come up with some differentiation between different tokens. Now the question is it really a utility token and not a security token? I think there is probably going to be the big question. But for a utility token itself, it's much easier to issue it. Typically, companies ask then the regulator for a non-action letter.
제가 한 가지 궁금한 게 아까 이보가 이제 발표를 하다가 궁금한 게 아까 이제 스위스 어떤 리조트에 그 디지털 몬드 상품이 이제 출시가 돼가지고 그거를 이제 거기에 토큰을 발행을 해가지고 그 토큰을 산 사람한테는 스키 리조트를 사용할 수 있는 뭐 할인권을 주고 그런 얘기를 했거든요. 그래서 그거를 좀 다시 좀 재밌는 케이스이기 때문에 좀 물어보려고 하거든요. So Ivo, you mentioned about this the digital bond product. By this company of the ski resort that they are issuing kind of blockchain loyalty vouchers, and then the issue users can buy their token and then they get a discount, and that's a very interesting test. I mean, case. So I mean, would you like to a little bit give us more information and how is it going on? I mean, you know.
I mean, since it's just a project I saw from the sideline, I can't comment in detail to how well it went or not. But it was one of the first use cases. It was established. It was traded. It was a live use case, or it is a live use case. It was for sure a marketing push because it went through the media. To what extent it pushes numbers for the company, that's something which was not published. So it's difficult for me to comment on that.
So what is? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, as you are the management of this, Gazprom Bank. I know you are offering a lot of plans to offer these crypto products and digital products. I mean, could you give me some examples of your bank or other banks that you are aware of?
Yes, I mean, we are Gazprom Bank looking at the moment at a couple of things. One thing I mentioned already, we are looking at how to do a bond. We're talking to a company who has two companies who have interest in a digital bond. Obviously, as mentioned, one of the issues there, if you want to have in an automated way a coupon payment, you need some kind of settlement coin. There can be an internal settlement coin which you apply, then your distribution network is a bit more limited, or you can have a listed settlement coin, but there you have a bit of the issue in terms of credit risk. That if you for example have hold Tether or distribute Tether, you wouldn't really know how safe Tether is, and that's obviously an ongoing concern. So that's probably the two things Gazprom Bank are doing at the moment. If I look at other banks, I mean, I see automated certificates where people try to put a token as a certificate. So and we see two companies, one bank and one broker dealer, which operate a private marketplace. And in Switzerland, it's an OTF. So it's itself not regulated, but can be operated by a regulated player, where clients can sign up on their OTF and then transact what they're doing. For example, a certificate in that case. But please keep in mind as well, the law is still very new in Switzerland. There are quite a number of POCs in the past, but adoption in a live productive environment only slowly starts now.
Yeah. Thank you.
오케이. 땡큐. 자, 그러면 이제 우리 이보 사우터님의 발표를 마무리하고요. 이제 두 번째 방금 이제 답변할 때 잠깐 들어오셨다가 나가셨는데 마티아스 쿠에르트 변호사님의 발표를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 주제는 이제 저희가 이제 안내해 드린 것처럼 이제 STO와 관련해서 이제 스위스의 이제 DLT 법이 이제 어떻게 지금 개정 시행되고 있는지에 대해서 좀 자세히 말씀해 주실 예정이고요. 그리고 아까 제가 처음에 말씀드렸던 것처럼 우리나라가 지금 이제 STO와 관련된 여러 가지 이제 제도나 이런 것들을 논의하고 있고, 오늘 또 신문 기사를 보니까 이제 예탁결제원에서 STO 관련된 서비스를 이제 뭐 테스트이긴 합니다만은 준비하고 있는 것에 대해서 또 나름 의미 있게 생각하는 그런 기사도 봤습니다. 그래서 오늘 이제 이 발표가 저희에게도 많은 도움이 되지 않을까 싶습니다. Mr. Kuert?
And sorry for the slight technical issues. I will ask you, Chuhi and Wu, to go to the next slide once this will be the case. To briefly introduce myself, I am Matthlas Kuert from the law firm CMS Switzerland, and I will present you in the next few minutes the new Swiss blockchain DLT laws and their impact on security token offerings. I will first provide you with a small overview and then focus on the instrument of the newly created uncertificated register securities and the tokenization of equity of Swiss companies, as well as the DLT trading venues. As Ivo already mentioned, we have new DLT blockchain laws in Switzerland. And these laws are not contained in one statute, but are amendments to 10 existing Swiss legal statutes. They have been approved by the Swiss Parliament in September 2020. The overall goal of the new laws is to accommodate the needs of blockchain or DLT or crypto ventures to create greater legal certainty for them. The main topics of the new laws are the creation of uncertificated register securities, which I will address in a moment. Then a new license category for DLT trading venues will be created, which I also will briefly address. And ultimately, another main topic are specific rules on the segregation of crypto-based assets and access to data in insolvency situations. Next slide, please. As you might be aware, and as also Ivo already mentioned, the Swiss regulator FINMA has introduced 3 token categories. The first category are payment tokens, respectively cryptocurrencies such as bitcoins. The second category are assets, respectively security tokens, and the third category are utility tokens. The main focus of the new Swiss blockchain and DLT laws are security tokens and in particular security token offerings, and the focus lies here in the creation of uncertificated register securities, which are important for issuances on the primary market, and then the DLT trading venues, which are provided for secondary market trading. Next slide, please. When we come to the uncertificated register securities, the rules governing these are provided for in the Swiss Code of Obligations. And as Ivo also already mentioned, the rules are in place since 1st February 2021 and can thus already be profited from. The problem which underlies the creation of uncertificated register securities was that legal uncertainty has evolved around the question how rights can be represented on the blockchain, or in other words, tokenized, and whether they can be lawfully transferred without a written instrument. And there have been scholars in the legal literature that suggested workarounds, but it was never clear whether these workarounds are waterproof. Now, the Swiss legislator took on this issue and created the solution, which are these uncertificated register securities, which allow for the legally secure transfer of rights by way of an entry in a decentralized register, such as a blockchain. And that's the important point. Without that, a written instrument is required. Therefore, the new laws allows, in principle, to transfer rights, for instance, by way of a wallet to wallet transaction over the blockchain. Next slide. No, this is the right one, sorry. And there are obviously certain prerequisites to create uncertificated register securities. First, an agreement between the issuer, for instance, a company, and the investor that the right to be tokenized shall be entered into and can only be claimed and transferred through a register must be concluded, which register second meets certain technical requirements, which we will briefly discuss later. In any case, the agreement between the issuer and the investor is referred to as a register agreement. The main content of this register agreement consists in a clause that the right to be tokenized shall be entered into and can only be claimed and transferred through a register such as a blockchain. Furthermore, also further points might be provided for in this register agreement. And the
한번 보겠습니다. 네, 네.
Okay.
Can I continue, or do you have a question?
Please continue.
Okay. The register agreement can, for instance, be contained in general terms and conditions, such as the issuing conditions for an offering drafted up by the issuer and accepted by the investor. Slide, please. And now these registers into which the uncertificated register securities can be registered and over which they can be transferred must also fulfill certain technical requirements, which I have provided for here on the slides, but I won't go through them in detail. What is every what is very important for our clients and the projects that we evaluate for them is that from a practical point of view, the most frequently used public blockchains for token offerings, for instance, the Ethereum blockchain, but also permission blockchains such as Corda are suitable registers in the sense of these requirements. And also there are service providers in the market that offer solutions designed to comply with these requirements. Therefore, you know, not every project, every STO project has to invent the wheel new, but rather service providers can be relied on. Then the next slide, please. What one has to, however, keep in mind, and here we come now to one of the most important use cases we expect in practice, which is the tokenization of equity shares of a Swiss company, which might be also a Swiss special purpose vehicle incorporated by foreign investors, for instance, or by foreign companies seeking to raise money. When we come to this use case, aside from the topics I already mentioned, further issues have to be kept in mind. And one of the issues concern regulatory topics. When it comes, for instance, to investments in real estate by way of a Swiss SPV, which is a use case that clients often ask us to look at, the Swiss collective investment schemes legislation must be looked at, which can be which can entail licensing requirements that might be a showstopper, unfortunately, for projects. There are, however, exceptions to the Swiss Collective Schemes Act, in particular companies which are operative companies, which are producing goods, and also holding companies of such operative companies, such as Swiss special purpose vehicles, do not fall under the collective investment scheme legislation. Therefore, an important use case are really operative companies, manufacturing companies, companies in the services field that want to raise money via a token offering. Another regulatory issue that that must be taken into account are the marketing requirements when it comes to the marketing, to the offering of a security token. Here, the main question obviously is whether the projects must draw up and have approved a fully fledged prospectus in the sense of Swiss law. However, also here there are exceptions. For instance, maybe you go already to the next slide. I'm sorry. no, now you went back, I think. The next one. Okay. This is. The slide should say use case tokenization of equity.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, this one. Yes, no worries at all. And here you see the points on the Collective Investment Schemes Act, which I mentioned, and now also the documentation requirements for the marketing of the tokens. And here, as I mentioned, the prospectus, which might have to be drafted up, but there are exceptions, and one important one is if you distribute the tokens only to qualified investors, professional and institutional investors, then you can profit from an exception. But for instance, also if you raise less than 8 million Swiss francs. Then the next slide, please. And here, beyond these regulatory topics, where if you want to tokenize assets by a Swiss special purpose vehicle or a Swiss company more generally, then also the corporate law structuring must be taken into account. But I won't go into the details here, but if you have questions later on, I'm happy to answer them. And ultimately, and this is also important for projects, also the tax side must be looked at, since you want to know how the token offering is taxed by the Swiss authorities, whether you might profit from exceptions and so on and so forth. Then to finish my presentation, and this is the last slide. So the next slide, please. I give you a short overview on the newly created DLT trading venues. And here the related laws, as Ivo also already mentioned, will enter into force in the beginning of August, which is in approximately 10 days. The DLT trading venue license is a new license category which allows for trading in particular uncertificated registered securities on the secondary market. It might as well be considered as the counterpart to this uncertificated registered securities, the security tokens which I introduced beforehand, because here the focus is on the primary market issuing, and now on these DLT trading venues, these tokens can also be traded on the secondary market. But apart from security tokens, the DLT trading venues might also allow for the trading of payment tokens and cryptocurrencies, for instance, Bitcoins, and therefore the license could also be used if you want to establish a crypto exchange, a more classical crypto exchange in Switzerland. Noteworthy legal highlights of the DLT trading venues are that these venues might offer services in the areas of trading, clearing, settlement, and custody of crypto-based assets, of tokens. Therefore, the entire value chain of the tokens, of the token trading can be offered out of one hand. And what is also important, as opposed to classical stock exchanges where only banks and traders can participate in the new DLT trading venues, individuals such as me and you can participate directly, which obviously means, and this is also an advantage which Ivo already mentioned in another context, that you can skip quite a few intermediaries. And ultimately, the licensing requirements for crypto exchanges for these DLT trading venues are mainly modeled after the existing licensing requirements for traditional exchanges, which means that it remains to be seen how many companies will apply for such license. But what is also important is that there are exceptions for so-called small DLT trading venues. And here the licensing requirements will be more relaxed. I think you don't see the presentation anymore, but anyway, I guess it will be shared afterwards. And on the last slide, you also find the contact details, and I'm happy to answer questions now, but also if you want to reach out, please do so on as per the contact details which are included on the last page of my slide deck. Thank you for listening to me.